Welcome back to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. I'm Angela, and this is
Kat.
we got it down today. The live shows are currently streamed on Mondays to YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and maybe one other place I can't remember. Remember to follow and subscribe and share with your friends. On the Monday segment of the show, Kat and I talk about topics we find interesting. And as you may have seen from our title, our topic today is what's wrong with no? And we have a quote from Marshall B. Rosenberg. When they say no, they're saying they have a need that keeps them from saying yes to what we're asking. If we can hear the need behind a no, we can continue the conflict resolution process, maintaining our focus on finding a way to meet everybody's needs, even if the other party says no to the particular strategy we presented to them. And that's by Marshall B. Rosenberg. He wrote Nonviolent Communication. Okay, Kat, what is wrong with no? It is so hard to hear it.
Well, it really is, especially if you're expecting a yes. And what's really funny about it is, and I'm going to take the opposite, a lot of times if we're expecting a no, we don't even want to ask the question.
Yeah.
And, in that case, I try and tell people, well, if you don't ask, the answer will definitely be no.
Yeah. That's true. How many times have I talked myself out of even asking?
Right. Because you think the answer is going to be no.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the whole thing. I think it all exists in expectations.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a meeting at work and you have this great idea and you thought it out, or you think you thought it out, and you present it and they're like, no.
Sometimes it's not even that clear.
Well, yeah. Or you ask your spouse, hey, let's go visit my parents this weekend. No. Because in-laws sometimes can be fraught with, tension and things like that.
Well, I think actually it's in family relationships where it is a lot harder to allow room for no. In fact, I would say, especially with my kids, it was really hard to learn because of that dynamic of believing that they should just do what I tell them to do. Because I'm in charge, Who hasn't used the because I said so as a parent? Like, I don't know, but it's hard. It is really hard, especially when shifting to allowing room for no.
Yeah, I'm just going to take these off today. It is really hard to do that. I even think now, it's kind of funny. As a kid, I was very conditioned. You don't tell your mom no.
Right.
And so even today, it's hard to say no to my parents. It's hard to say no to my mom. And which is really funny because my mom is in this habit of every time I go there, she gives me something to take home.
Okay.
It's just weird. And, I'm like, no, I'm probably like, Mom, I don't need that. No.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's her way of showing love or something, like, here, I'm giving you something to take home. And, that's a kind of like a silly little example, but it's very hard to say that when there's a power relationship. Same thing. If you're the boss, if you're the boss of someone, or someone is your boss or you're their boss, It's actually hard in both cases. It's hard to be the person saying no if you sincerely want to have that communication line open.
Right. Because
Um,
it could just shut down the other person too. Me saying no, the other person could just be like, "What do I do with that?" or just walk away.
well, and I think that's what's wrong with no right there. It's the way
Mm-hmm.
that it's used. Now, when I was working and I had people reporting to me, and they would come to me with an idea and say, "Well, I think we should change this way and do it this way." And I'd listen to their idea, and I would, if I had to say no, I'd say no, but I would qualify it with why I'm saying no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I understand, like, I understand what you're saying, but here are some things that you are not including in whatever you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually because things were omitted, steps were omitted in a process that were important that needed to be done.
Right.
Um, and so, or sometimes I'd say, okay, well, let's try it for a bit and give me more data before we make a decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, what
It's
do? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's that opening of communication. Oftentimes, no closes communication.
Right. And yet we inevitably hear it. So, like something that happens inside of me when someone just says no is, and it's just the word no, is this feeling rises up, and it's almost like they didn't even hear me. Um,
Hmm.
and there's no negotiation at that point, no communication. I'm not sure I want to use that word negotiation, because I think that really the best thing is for us to figure out it's me and the other person against the problem and not against each other. And I think sometimes when the word no comes in, or when someone's not really happy with a conclusion that or how we're going to move forward on something, I just lost my train of thought. It went right out the window. My brain said nope. um, like yeah. I'm gonna stop, because now I can't even remember what I was saying beforehand. This is what happens sometimes with CRPS and pain.
And it's okay. I want to say hi to Becky, who's here
Yes.
this morning. Um, so I like that, not negotiation but communication, because no is like final.
Yeah. Oh, that's where I was going. Like when that feeling. Thank you so much. When that feeling rises up, then how do I stay in a place of empathy, so that I can want to understand what the no is about? Because all of us, sometimes the being told no, that anger and frustration comes up, and then I can't even find my way to have empathy for the person so that I can investigate, so that I can understand, and maybe we can create a new, something totally different. Like I remember going to a meeting a long time ago where I had thought I had a solution to a problem. And in this particular meeting, there's always discussion. So it wasn't like a blatant no, but all of the discussion basically said, no, there's a better way. So maybe I need to remember that in that moment that I hear no, it just means that there can be more discussion
Hmm.
until we both find a solution that works. And sometimes that means I'm uncomfortable and they're uncomfortable
Hmm.
with the solution. Like nobody gets exactly what they wanted.
Right. Um, and it's kind of interesting that you bring that kind of thing up with discussion. I was at a meeting last night, and somebody went against the group norms. something that the group had decided we were going to do, and she went against that. And after we were done meeting, because I didn't want to bring it up in the meeting, I pulled her aside and I said, we've made an agreement not to do that in this meeting. I just wanted to let you know that.
To not do what? To not.
I don't necessarily. It's not important.
Right, but to not. I think I'm trying to understand.
Not to do what she did.
Okay, so there was a conclusion.
And yes, then, a conclusion that the group had decided, right, and the person did something the opposite of that conclusion that the group had decided.
Got it. Okay.
And so, so like I said, after the meeting, I pulled her aside and said, we don't do that. It was very uncomfortable for me to do that.
Right.
And it was very uncomfortable for her. And there was immediately this defensiveness. And so I opened it up. I said, next meeting we have, we can bring this up as a topic of discussion. I said, I'm not saying no. I'm saying the group has said no, but we can always revisit it.
Right.
And I tried to open that up because I knew, I felt the tension because I had to say no.
Right.
And I tried to do it in a way that wasn't embarrassing or anything by taking her aside after the meeting. And, there was the tension on her side. Well, all immediately defensive. And I was just like, well, wait a minute. This is something the group decided, but if you feel strongly about it, you can bring it up. We can revisit it.
Right.
So I didn't want to make it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes
I left that room.
You didn't. Okay. I'm sorry. I lost connection for a second.
Oh, yeah. I didn't leave it as an absolute no. I left it for room to discuss. Because knowing how that no feels, both from having to deliver it, because having to deal with the discomfort from the other person and hearing it.
Yeah.
And having to deliver it wasn't necessarily a nice thing either. But the interesting thing is that letting it go would have potentially caused more conflict.
Right. I'm trying to think of. Sorry.
Yeah, that's when people start. Well, I thought we decided not to do that. So nobody wants to confront it. Nobody wants to say that no.
Right.
It's uncomfortable sometimes to say no.
Yeah.
And so there was, I tried to use these methods of saying no, but doing it in this way to open up the communication rather than close it.
Yeah. Wow. I'm doing a great job at stepping away. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Like allowing that room for no is so. But I like how you said opening up. So in the way that you say no, being really aware of how to say no in a loving way, that really brings it up. And I also want to point out that just because it's no right this minute doesn't mean it won't be no in, I'm going to say 5 or 10 minutes, but usually it's much longer. I'll never forget my oldest was very young, and she super smart and could bring up, well, what about this, or what about and sometimes I would say no, and she would bring something up, and I would be like, wow, that is a fantastic point. I hadn't thought about it that way. And then what would happen is I would shift. And so we ultimately, the kids and I became this beautiful team of people because we would allow room for no. And then if somebody else had an insight or an idea, we could come back to it. So it was not us against each other. It was us against whatever the problem was. And giving them room to say no and being open to the possibility that these kids had insight that I might not have was a huge, huge lesson to me to really remember Ooh, I don't know all of it, and I have blind spots too.
Yeah, and we've spoken about that before,
Mm-hmm.
about the idea. Well, I think it was a couple weeks ago, with the whole idea of the guy walking down the streets causing trouble, and on one side he had a red hat, and on the other side he had a white hat, and everybody's saying, "Well, who? No, he had a red hat on. No, he had a white hat on."
Yeah.
And so it was, it's understanding that there are different perspectives, different sides to the opinion, and it's important to listen to all of that.
Yeah, and I think acknowledging too, sometimes with that no comes me acknowledging that I might be wrong, and that's also uncomfortable, right? Like I don't think I'm the only one in the world that is uncomfortable with, oh crap, I was sure I thought of all the potential options.
Well, yeah, and that's a lot of times what we try to do. I mean, I know whenever I'm ready to go into uh, a situation that I know has the potential to be tension filled and lots of no's and miscommunications and misunderstandings, to try and, in my mind, think of every possibility and then think of how I'm going to respond if that possibility comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and because I don't like that, no, I don't like to feel that uncomfortable. And so, me wanting to be right, or at least get my point across and be heard and understood, I start thinking of all the possibilities. And I think with learning to be okay with no, or learning to be okay with, all right, that's your opinion,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to agree with it.
Yeah, I would think like the extra work of coming up with all the potentials too could lead to some extra noise and bias in my mind than when I start to try to interpret what someone else is telling me.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've already got some ideas of what they're telling me now, hearing no and or saying no may not even be an option, which could actually be detrimental because now I'm not open to the possibilities of a solution.
Well, exactly. And I found that my interactions with others, since I've kind of given some space, or at least tried to give that space, um, for others to express their opinions, learning to ask questions. Well,
Yeah, which
okay,
is,
you
I was
said
just going to
no.
say, it's so hard in high conflict too.
Right, right. And even in that time, sometimes it's okay to say, we need a time out,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
like you said, when high conflict is there, it's like you're so emotional, that, and you're so protective. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
that fight or flight thing, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily have to flee it completely, and you certainly don't have to fight it out. But sometimes it's better to say, you know what, I think we need a break to reflect on it.
Right. And I know the Gottmans talk about taking a 20-minute break. And one of the most important things during that 20-minute break is to actually not think about the problem, which when when I first experienced that high conflict or those no's or being able to even empathize, because high conflict, all of a sudden, everybody, usually my experience is everybody's fighting for their own thing, and it's no longer a team against a problem. It's the conflict actually becomes the problem. So then
Mm-hmm.
there's no room. And so part of the trick is go do something else and stop re-triggering it, because most emotions will dissipate around, it takes about 20 minutes for that emotion to rise and fall, unless of course we re-trigger it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So that happens a lot of times with people who are panicking or in anxiety. They get into this loop and then can't get out of it because it's re-triggered by the thoughts that keep coming up. It's very hard. So the same thing I think happens when someone says can happen in when there's a lot of no happening too, or
Mm-hmm.
not healthy communication.
Right. And again, it goes back to that absolute no. Just no.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah. How
And
does
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, how do you empathize with no? You know, if let's say you ask me a question, I'm like no, and you get that feeling. Then what do you do next?
Usually the initial reaction, especially if I'm expecting a yes, might be like, whoa. Um, and I learned not to give in to that initial emotional reaction. It's an ongoing process. It's not always easy. It's um, it's about acknowledging the feeling, but then being able to say, all right, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So in a case with a boss at work, and you come up with a proposal and your boss says no. Okay, what is there a reason why no? Is there something missing in my proposal? What could it take to get to yes? Because I think this is a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the example I gave from last night, I mean, I had given the reasons why the group had initially made that decision not to do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Right.
Um, and these, because there were reasons. Because I didn't want to just say no, don't do that. I
Mm.
wanted the person to understand. I wanted the person to also understand that this is something that can be revisited. So it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't an absolute no. So when I'm thinking of those things, if I'm the person delivering the no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to put myself in the other person's position.
Mm-hmm.
And what would I want to hear after a no?
Yeah.
Especially if it's something personal like that.
Right.
Because if you're at work and you're investing a lot of time into a proposal, you you know you would like it to be accepted,
Right.
maybe with changes or constructive criticism, but just to hear no,
Yeah.
it's like it feels like a personal attack almost.
Yeah. Even sometimes I think when someone doesn't specifically use the word no, if they don't just say no, but it's clear that that's not what's going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It still is for me this really uncomfortable feeling. Um, Becky just said, I don't like no. And which distracted me into thinking, oh, I don't like no. How do I behave when I don't like no? Um, I think I do more research. I try to come up with all the things so that the other person has to say yes, and then actually set myself up for like a forced yes. And what happens then? Then I really don't want to hear no because I did all
Mm-hmm.
this extra work because I don't like no.
Mm-hmm.
And now I still hear it, then I'm really mad about it.
Right. And that's where I think the difference there is the focus is still on yourself and what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to put yourself in the other person's position. So if I'm being told no, I'm thinking, what is that person going through? Why they're saying no?
Right.
And I may not have the answer. I may not know the answer, but at least allowing for the possibility that there's a reason is
Mm-hmm.
something, and that I can decide to open that communication or not. And then if I'm the person who has to deliver the no,
Right.
I'm thinking, trying to put myself in the person's position is, and explaining why it's a no.
Yeah. Well, and I would think staying open to the possibility that there may be something I am completely unaware of, or that there's potentially a solution that maybe isn't, everybody doesn't get exactly what they want, but it's still not just no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking of a time when one of my daughters came in and they were certain it was, there were only two choices. And I remember sitting back because I knew the conversation was coming, right? And I sat back and I took a deep breath and I just said, what if there's something else? What if it's not just that or that? And it changed the whole trajectory of our conversation just by thinking of the possibility that it's not a binary choice.
Mm-hmm.
Which can be, I think it's really hard, especially when there's already been conflict, because in that particular situation there had been conflict and things like that, a significant amount of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so to maintain that that peace inside of me actually was really, really difficult. And I think we were both happy-ish with what came out of it, and I think it started another shift in our relationship for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we could be a team, whereas before we were unable to be a team. There was a constant butting of heads.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to note that, occasionally there are people who live for the conflict. That you may encounter people who are not willing to engage in that way. And so it's very difficult, but it's also important to listen to that too, for your own peace of mind. And those kinds of things is, that's when I go, do I have to have a relationship with this person?
Mm-hmm.
How important is this to me? And that can be painful when there are expectations.
Right.
But I think most people are willing to be open-minded, at least, and be willing to look at that. But again, it's a learned behavior. It's learned. I've taken a long time to learn to allow for the no, and I'm still learning. I don't always get it right.
Well, it is hard, right? And like you were talking about conflict, I mean, as soon as the conflict takes over, even then, but sometimes what someone says also can trigger, like if there's a no, it triggers something inside of me that is or hits a nerve. I'm trying to think how to explain it, of a past wrong or a past something that then I've got to figure out how I'm going to work through just because of that no. So sometimes I'm grateful that somebody said it, even though not in the moment. Well, let's be clear. I just want to be clear. I do get angry in that moment, like, how dare they? But when I really look at it, it actually gives me an opportunity to look deeper inside of me and go, okay, what is this really about? When they say no and I feel this way, it's usually not as simple as I'm just not getting my way. Usually there's way more underneath it than that. But I'm responsible to investigate that inside of me, and hopefully can communicate that I'm doing my best to work that out, and also be able to have enough empathy for the other person that maybe they can feel safe enough to investigate what's happening inside of them too.
Mm-hmm.
But I can never depend on it being the other person that will start that.
And I think that was kind of my point in that whole thing, is that sometimes people aren't there. And so it kind of, the idea of letting it begin with me, being the person to take that first step to have the empathy, because I can't put it on other people. Well, you should do this, you should do that. No, I have to start it.
Yeah. It's tough stuff, hearing no, and saying it too sometimes, especially if it's if you've been a person who doesn't say no, or hasn't, who's always been a people pleaser or a fixer. I've been there, right? And as a person with disabilities, I know for me it's also really hard when I've done everything that I can to a potential point, and then I'm told no. Talk about the feelings that come up for that. So,
right.
So I have to look at it as, sometimes I have to be like, okay, I need to reach out to other people, either have the conversation or start reaching out. And can that be good? Yeah, I think it can.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting that you bring up, with a disability, because one of the things is you've said this before, is that you have a certain reliance on others, because there are some things that you cannot do for yourself. And I'm, finding the older I get, and my infirmities are adding up, I'm finding I'm having a harder time doing certain things. And some days, if my issue flares up, I can't open a jar.
Right. Is it harder to accept no? When
I really want a pickle with my lunch, and nobody's willing to open the jar for me, I'm very disappointed. But yeah, I say that in jest. But yeah, that is really hard, to be able to accept that no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's part of life.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much more. I know we're also over time, of the different types of situation. When I say that, we're learning to accept no, and maybe even learning to say no, depending on where someone is on that spectrum, can be helpful. And then learning to empathize on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just also want to apologize to our watchers today for my brain being not, I feel like I've been a little bit all over the place today.
I think we all have empathy for you. We may not actually understand since we don't go through it, your condition, but I certainly have empathy for it.
Oh, thank you.
And I got your back.
You do, because when I can't remember, you say you pick up on it. Or
there we go.
Forget what I'm saying. So thank you so much. Any last thoughts before we close out this show today?
I think we're good. Just what's wrong with no? Nothing's wrong with no. It's only wrong when there's no empathy.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm Angela, and
I'm Kat.
We're gonna get it down. Okay, I'll do it again. I'm Angela.
And I'm Kat.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.